well. I can't complain this week, so it's been going good, and I'm so excited to be a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you. We were just talking how we just love doing these things, and we're sometimes maybe in another life or some other people are out partying. This is our party. Like we can discuss things that we both have gone through. So thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you. No, like I said, I'm excited, and I even have my soda water with lime. This is how we party now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today you're joining us to talk about alcohol addiction as well as your journey. So do me a favor, when it comes to this type of recovery process, because I know a number of people go through it. How was your journey and how was your story with alcohol?
So I'll tell you a little bit about my story. And I really put myself into a different box. I thought because I wasn't drinking every day, I was not physically dependent on alcohol. I actually really enjoyed some of the weeks, well, weekends I drink a lot. The weeks where I wasn't drinking. So I think, and this was prior to 2022, and there really wasn't this huge sober space like they have now. I thought it was AA or nothing, and I just didn't really relate to AA. And although there's nothing fundamentally wrong with AA, but I was like, I don't want to call myself an alcoholic. I don't think I'm that bad. And so by kind of having this narrow view of what it meant to remove alcohol, it took me a long time to get here. My story is really when in my 30s, I started noticing some really negative effects of drinking. One is I actually had a whole summer where I blacked out a bunch. So I blacked out a bunch and I would do some really mean things when I would drink. I would say things I didn't mean, but then I would drink maybe the next weekend and I would be fine. And so it was kind of like one foot in, one foot out that sometimes things would go well and then some things wouldn't go well. And I just thought like maybe if I could moderate or get my drinking under control, it would be better. And again, because I didn't drink every day of the week, I thought like I just couldn't quit drinking. I thought I had to just like figure this out. If I could just get control over this thing, everything would be fine. What started happening is my sleep would get disrupted. So I'd wake up sweaty sometimes. I would wake up at 3 a.m. with anxiety, and it was becoming really problematic. I would force myself on Mondays to work out because I was good during the week. I did my thing, and that's what I had to do. But often I'd wake up inflamed, feeling awful. And sometimes I would overeat when I would drink. And it was just like this vicious cycle, but everybody around me drank. I lived on a lake. That's what you did. Like there were definitely some really embarrassing times. That's why I said when I say like I didn't view myself as an alcoholic, I don't think you have to view yourself as an alcoholic. You can if that feels good to you. But I think if alcohol is causing a problem, it's causing a problem. It's just that black and white. So I didn't really get um get any help or like even go on this journey until I moved to Florida in 2021. And prior to actually stopping alcohol, I had moments where I was really emotional when I drank. It was just really embarrassing. And I thought, okay, I have to try to stop drinking. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it. But in 2022, I was like, I'm going to stop drinking. My birthday's actually on January 10th. I was 39 at the time. And so I made sure after my birthday, because I wanted to drink one more last time, I was going to try to stop drinking. So I embarked on this journey of removing alcohol. I listened to this Audible, This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. And I remember being flabbergasted by how bad alcohol was for you, not just your health, but like in all aspects. And so it was really an interesting book to read about. So I would definitely recommend that book to everybody because it's not a book where you have to be sober or not sober. It doesn't matter. It's just a lot of good information. But before I go on, I want to kind of stop and see if you have any questions. I don't want to just go on and on because it's, but I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up staying sober here in a few minutes.
No, I think that's a beautiful explanation. And remember, they're here to listen to you. They're not here to listen to me, right? But I think what happens to a lot of people, like I have a former friend, and he struggles with alcohol, or he struggled with alcohol, and he was, drinking and driving. There's times where we'd find him, like we'd go, let's say, to the bar, and we would lose track of him, and then we'd find him unconscious in the bushes somewhere. And I know for me, on the outside looking in, because I didn't have the struggle, a part of me felt that I was enabling in a way, just because I was saying, okay, let's go here where I knew there was alcohol. Let's go there where I know there's alcohol. Even though I didn't know the extent of his struggles, I just knew that there was a struggle. For you, when you were drinking, as you mentioned, what, you lived on the lake, and that's what people did you find, looking
Mhm.
back, that there was people enabling the type of behavior that you're engaging in?
I think in our culture, it's enabling. There's a lot of glamorization and social expectations of drinking. Like we should pop bottles, right? We like open champagne and we're all like, woo. But yet, if you can't handle your alcohol, you have a problem, right? So it's like this, you can't win. But I don't know if people were necessarily always enabling me. I think it was just the culture. So like I think that um, if I look back at other people that maybe I could say that they probably had a drinking problem or, and I don't want to say a drinking problem, um, but their relationship with alcohol wasn't going well. Because I mean, I don't know everyone's extent, but I do think, I think we do enable people, but not sometimes purposefully. I think it's a hard fine line because I think a lot of us do know people in our lives that are suffering with alcohol or drug addiction or ourselves. I mean, it's really prevalent, and I think it's really hard because what you're saying too is that potentially, yeah, we might be enabling, but like even if we weren't enabling, would this person still be drinking? Because we don't have that control over somebody else. And I think that's obviously a huge topic in itself. But I think that it was just a culture. Like everybody drank. And I think the problem is when we try to keep up with people appearances and what we're supposed to do, it's hard because not everybody can drink the same. Not everybody, you know, but again, what you're saying too is that you might have been binge drinking too. That's what we were doing. We were binge drinking. So it was like, I don't know if people were necessarily enabling, but we were all doing unhealthy drinking at the end of the day. Binge drinking is not healthy. And a lot of people don't admit either that they feel like they have a problem. So, and it's hard because, yeah, sometimes people go to an extreme, but like, how do you address it, right? Like, especially if you're part of the extreme. So it's kind of I think it's all very sticky. It's a sticky topic. And we don't, in our culture, again, we don't talk enough about the real downfalls. Like, we talk more about the excitement of alcohol versus the really reality of the next day. Or your friend gets in a bush and everyone's laughing, but really it's like sad as hell, right? Like, it's sad.
It is, it is. It's like, because you get this visual, right? And when you stop, and forgive me for those who are watching, when you see the visual, it is funny in a way, right? Because no one is passed out in a good looking way. Like no one's passed out in like a GQ model pose, right? It's usually you're at your ugliest, it's usually at your messiest, you're very vulnerable in a sense. And I look at alcohol, and I remember, and you and I look like we're around the same age. I remember the commercials being so upbeat, being so incentivized, right? Like, especially, like, I'm gonna take it from a male's perspective, right? From a man's perspective. I remember the commercials, whereas you get alcohol, and a few minutes later, the most attractive girl in the room is on your arm. Right? Like everyone around
Yep.
you's having, you remember that? I remember that,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, if I was young and impressionable at that time, which I was, I can see why so many people my age were falling to it, because as a man, like I didn't have women that wanted me, or I wasn't dating women that looked like that in the commercial, right? So I'm like, okay, you know what? I have a beer of this, or I have a shot of this. The most attractive girl's going to be around me. You look at, like, when you go to clubs and bars, what's one of the incentives for you to get the VIP booth? You have to buy bottle service, right? So it paints this image that alcohol is so attractive because everyone around you becomes attractive. But then you mentioned the dark side and you mentioned the culture. And I want to get your perspective. How much of an impact do you think the culture of drinking has on people?
Oh my gosh, it's astounding. And I'll give you some examples and also share a little bit of my journey about what was really hard for me when I stopped drinking. This is part of it. So the glamorization, like what you were saying, and the romanticizing of alcohol, pairing it with social status. Like look at Sex in the City. They're drinking like their Cosmos, like having like fancy shoes and like it's like this warped world of like this is what classy people do. However, the problem with it is that it goes into our subconscious. So my son, who's going to be 10, he went on a vacation. I didn't drink, but everyone around us, like a lot of people I was with, drank. And he told me, he goes, when I'm 21, I'm going to drink. And it's not because like he knows that alcohol is addicting, right? Because he hasn't been exposed to the addicting nature of alcohol, but it looks really freaking fun. And the problem is that we don't know what's fun and what's not fun without alcohol. We think alcohol brings the party. We think it's exciting. It's what you do as an adult. It's like that exciting thing. When I turn 21, I get to drink. And so if we see this over and over again, like ads, like the subliminal message about, like the banana and the vodka only has this many calories, When you see that over and over and over again, it goes into your subconscious. What does that mean? It doesn't become a conscious thought. Think about driving. We don't think about driving because it's now in our subconscious. That same thing happens with alcohol. So you think it's helping you sometimes having this perceived benefit. It's alluring. So when we stop drinking or when you're still drinking, you can't fathom having like a life without alcohol. It seems very difficult. So if you've been drinking for 20 plus years, it's also addicting. Number one, it's extremely addicting. It's really weird when people remove alcohol because it's like, how am I supposed to function? And it's a normal thought because you've been programmed. So this is the issue when things aren't talked about is that people are like, aren't sober people boring? I used to think that, and no one directly told me sober people were boring. Somehow in my brain, that is what I thought. And again, like in my son's when he was younger in the children's movie, they had mice drinking wine. So like it showed to children that that's like a normal part of being an adult, and that's fancy. It's fancy to have an expensive glass of wine. And over time, again, that gets implanted in your brain. And then you're like, okay, well, that's what we're supposed to do. So when people talk about removing alcohol, one thing that's difficult for people, one, not all, is the fact that your social expectations. Who are you without alcohol? What are you going to do on vacation now that you don't drink? You don't celebrate on vacation anymore because that's a part of it. And so this gets ingrained. And if you're like me, now this was a little bit ago, like I just didn't think I had to stop drinking. I thought like only bad people did. Because again, those were things that I knew about. What do we hear about? Oh, people that have severe alcohol problems are homeless or they're on the streets. You can be very functional, have a master's degree, have a full-time job, raise a family, and have a problem with alcohol. It's a myth that you have to be rock bottom. And I hope you don't go rock bottom because surely that's not going to be a good place to be. So that's kind of my thoughts on that is that unless we start telling the truth about what the real effects of alcohol, people unfortunately don't know. And so your comment about enabling, it's not necessarily that we're enabling people. We don't sometimes actually know any better because we've never been taught any better.
100% agree. I think a lot of the myths, as you mentioned, are a result of that. We like romanticize it. And you mentioned something that I wanted to get your opinion on was who am I without the alcohol, without the addiction? When you first saw yourself with sober eyes, what is it that you thought of yourself at that time?
So my story is a probably, I don't know if it's unique, but so Initially, it took me about, so I stopped drinking in January of 2022. Then I drank again in the summer of 2022. I had a lot of social pressure and it was really hard. I officially stopped drinking in November of 2022 and I haven't drank since. For me, it was like kind of this roller coaster of who am I? Yes. And I can tell you over 2 years later, it's not only possible, but it's a better life. But for me, when I stopped drinking, I didn't get any support. Like I didn't do anything. And I would not recommend that. But for me, it was like, who am I? But also it was really hard because everybody around me drank. That's what the weekend sometimes still entailed to some degree. Even though I had a son, I wasn't drinking again Monday through Sunday, but it was very much a weekend thing. And I know a lot of people do drink on the weekends as a wind down. So for me, it's like I romanticize alcohol so much. I actually had very, very bad anxiety in month two of removing alcohol because I didn't know how I was going to go on vacation. Well, like I literally had like almost a panic attack. Like, how am I supposed to like go on vacation and not drink? And so for me, it was like kind of in stages. So I think for me, it was like for the finding myself was finding what kind of gave me more joy and more purpose. And so that was kind of something I had to find out like, okay, what really does excite me now that I don't drink? It's not that my life was miserable, but like we can get into the mundane of our job, of our life, and just kind of do the routine. And we don't really examine, like, is this kind of what I want? Am I with the person I want to be? Because the other thing will happen is your relationships, whether it's with your friends or your romantic partner, um, perhaps can get better, or they end up falling away because alcohol was the glue to your relationships. And so with finding yourself, you're going to find that you're going to find more purpose. And that's just what I believe. I think alcohol brings like a lack of clarity. It's very hard to figure out things when you're numbing out or jumping to alcohol for excitement, right? We don't just drink to numb out. We drink because our life's not maybe as exciting as we think it is. Maybe we're not happy in our jobs and it's very easy to not change your life, right? It's easier just to kind of go back to the comfort zone. So part of my journey was getting out of my comfort zone and doing things that were really hard and finding what actually brought me joy. So in 2023, I was like, I want to figure out more purpose. And I did join a program in January of 2023. It was a program, not like AA, but it was online. And it helped me solidify and keep like repeating the myths of alcohol, the glamorization, because that took me a long time to rewire my brain. So it took me a substantial amount of time to do that. And then through that process and through trying to figuring out, okay, what do I want to do now that I'm not drinking? To think about, and I literally put the intention out like, okay, universe, I want to like find more purpose. And so since then, I've written two children's books and published them. And I'm going to stop there, but part of this is finding what lights you up. And then at the same time, also finding out what's holding you back. And that can be difficult because when you have certain things that you've not addressed, it's kind of you have to deal with some of your emotions that you probably haven't really explored in a long time because you didn't know they were even there.
So let me ask you, when you were on your journey to being sober, and as you mentioned, people around you were drinking, people around you were remaining the same essentially, right? But you were the one changing. What were some of the struggles you went through with some of your relationships at that time as you were sobering up while everyone else around you was still drinking and still remaining the same?
So the biggest one was probably with my husband. So it's not, I, I have lots of different thoughts about this. One is we can't fundamentally change another person. So I think that that's really something that's important to understand through this whole process. We can only change ourselves. But for me, it was difficult with some of my friends, but not all my friends, because as a lot of us have gotten older, people don't just want to drink. Um, but like I also have to do things outside of like things that revolve around drinking. You fundamentally do change when you stop drinking and you work on yourself. Like it just you can't go back. But with my relationship with my husband, it was difficult because I don't know about you, but going out on the weekends with somebody who's drinking and you're not, and they're drinking to like get buzzed, it's not like they're having a cocktail. You know, it's a little difficult because the connection piece isn't always there, and you're like, what do we have in common? And so sometimes that was difficult for me. And, I'm not going to go into terrible detail about, the ending of my marriage, but ultimately we did separate and we are going through divorce. And it's not just because of the drinking, but like you do find if you truly have a connection. And the other thing is sometimes when we are drinking, we're playing small in our relationships, in our life in general, and we're a little disconnected from our intuition. So in relationships, I think, sure, you can still be with someone that drinks if you're okay with that. I think some people, not everybody, I think some people don't deal with the relationship component sometimes. They kind of just do the thing. And some people's relationships are fine, and some people they get in a better relationship because they stop drinking and they aren't doing mean things. I definitely in my past have said some pretty not nice things when I was drinking to my husband, but relationships are difficult. So that was definitely hard for me. And then, you know, again, your boundaries change. So if you go out and do the same thing, this is what I found. You might like the thing you do, but when you're sober, you might be like, huh, do I actually like doing this? Or do I like doing it for as long of a period of time? And you trick yourself to think that maybe that you're not having fun because you're not drinking. Again, it might not be a conscious thought, but really your boundaries and what you like to do change. So, like I said, sometimes I like to stay out late. Sometimes I'm like, I'm tired. Or people just get too drunk and they're annoying and I don't want to be around them because it's like basically there's no connection. It's like talking to a wall sometimes.
I used to date someone that was drinking, like it was her thing. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because, similar to you, I know how it feels because sometimes the drinking mask certain things that if everyone was sober, you begin to see them, right? So in this example, she would come over half in the bag and expect
Mm.
certain things to happen on a romantic level, right? And for me, I always had a hard rule that I don't engage in any type of intimacy if there's alcohol, if the person is fueled by alcohol, either myself or this other person, right? God forbid, Me Too movement. So the reason why I say that is because you don't know what can happen, because the thing with addiction is many times people aren't of their right mind or of their conscious mind, right? So I think people simplify and minimize the impact that does have on the relationship, especially when one stops participating in that addiction or if one didn't have it at all. So when you share that, it made me remember that because there's so many people out there who's struggling with addiction and they're like, okay, this person is going through this. And I'll ask you if you went through this. Do I leave when this person is struggling with this? Or do I help them to get out of it and then I leave? Right? Like, what would you say to the person who's battling that, where they're like, okay, I don't want to leave this person while they're going through it, but I have to make a decision. Do I do I compromise myself for that person and then leave, or do I say, okay, you know what, enough's enough, and I step out? What's your thoughts?
So I think I'll give you my opinion, and I'll also say that it's very easy to because I remember when I was like hearing stories, and my husband did not cheat on me, by the way. Hearing stories of people cheating, and I'm like, why don't they just leave them? Like, I would never stay in that. And then you have your own separation, and it's really hard. It's awful. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I totally get why people stay with people. This is the thing. There is no hard and fast rule. I would say this is we cannot control another person. So somebody else's addiction is not your, I guess, I don't want to say problem to fix, is that you can't get somebody sober. They have to do it themselves. Addiction's hard. There's a lot of like some people lie a lot